questions we wrestle with as Christians about who God is, how do we live out our faith, what is the Bible, what is the truth of the Bible, what are we supposed to believe, how are we supposed to live? There are really big, deep questions that we ask each other, that we ask God, that we wrestle with ourselves. And that's why the Cultivate podcast exists, to help us go deeper in our understanding of who God is, His Word, and the way that He's called us to live. Hey everyone, welcome to the Cultivate podcast with Grove Church. I'm Charlie Lofton, lead pastor there, and we have with us
Abigail Boone.
Abigail Boone, podcast producer, creative director. Mm-hmm. What else?
Oh boy, picky eater.
Picky eater squad.
Heyo. Chick-fil-A lover. Heyo.
Great friend, great question asker, awesome part of our staff. Glad, as always, that you're here. Mm-hmm. And we are in a series on systematic theology. And based on how this has gone, last week's episode was undetermined whether or not we had made the Final Four or not.
Right.
If the Hogs have still not lost for this episode, we won the national championship.
Woo!
So,
and if that happens on the first Q&A, we'll do a moment to call the Hogs, just me and you here, and we'll make it awkward, and people have to watch. And
I'll wear the striped
suit
overalls
Love
that I have. So,
and the net hat.
And the net. So I've been on Jason Sewell's late night show with Sewell to do basketball previews the last 2 years. And so we joke about that there are some people out there in the world, the only context in which we know me is a guy who wears that outfit.
That's awesome. I love that.
And then there's all the people here at the church.
Right.
Most of whom have never seen me in that outfit.
Oh, really?
So we'll see.
I like knowing both sides.
We'll see. Okay, so we're in a series on systematic theology. We spent the last couple of weeks talking about Christology, and we talked about Jesus being fully God, and then last week we talked about Jesus being fully human. And today is probably going to be the most, I don't know if intellectual is the right word, just kind of more theologically deep, probably that we've done at least maybe since the Trinity, or maybe even more so, because there's one of these things where the theology of this gets really precise and particular, and one of these things where you can kind of get into historical heresies really, really quickly, and you think that you're just talking.
Right.
So to answer the question, a couple of questions. Okay, Jesus is fully God and He's fully human, and He has both of these. Are we talking about He's got one kind of jumbled nature? Does He have two natures and He kind of comes in and out of them? I'm Jesus the dude, Jesus the God, or what does it mean? And then how can we explain and understand the issues where, this is a characteristic of God and this is a characteristic of a person, and they contradict each other? How can you have both natures? How can you both be limited in time and space and not limited by time and space? How can you know everything and not know everything?
Right.
How can you be able to be killed and you be eternal? How do some of these things coexist? And that is called, and we'll come back to it, that is called the hypostatic union. Okay. But then we'll also talk about hypostatic union. And we'll also talk about kenosis, which is kind of the process, the word that is used to describe the process by which what we would call the incarnation, Jesus becoming a person. Okay. We use incarnation very often to talk about the birth of Jesus. But technically, I guess chronologically, the incarnation happened before that, approximately 9 months before He was born, right? Okay. So we're really more kind of talking about the theological process rather than the physical process. What does it mean for God to come to earth in the way that Jesus
is a state of being, not a moment that happens, right?
Well, the incarnation is the moment in which it happened.
But He was incarnate the whole time.
Once He got here, He was incarnate.
He was?
Yeah. But the incarnation is what started His incarnating.
Surely that's not a word.
It can't be. So we'll start with the hypostatic union, and I'll give you a definition for it. The hypostatic union refers to the union of Jesus Christ's divine and human natures in one person. It affirms that Jesus is fully God and fully human, and these two natures exist without confusion, change, division, or separation. Okay? So he is fully God and fully human, one person, two natures, which doesn't make any sense in the same way that three persons, one God doesn't make any sense.
Right.
One entity can only be one person. Entity and being and person feel synonymous to us. And so a God existing in three persons who are distinct but only are one God is not a logical construct that makes sense to us.
Right.
In the same way, one person having two distinct natures that can't always be aligned also doesn't make sense. And so we need to understand just kind of the limitations of our ability to understand this, which is why you get these kind of precise sorts of theological definitions, and then you try to explain it, and eventually you'll end up in a historical heresy.
Right.
But, you know, it happens every now and then. For the most part, and we've talked about this before, we are a user-friendly systematic theological podcast, but every now and then...
It's pretty specific.
I'm saying some of the bros will find us on YouTube.
Oh, and they would say we're wrong.
Yeah, and then they'll comment at the nitpicking of our precision, which, you know, I get it.
We're not claiming to be a Michelin star restaurant.
Right. We're trying to put it down there, and it's like we're trying not to ever just kind of, you know, just say anything overtly heretical, but also it's like it's difficult to kind of go to, this is not a graduate level.
Right. We're making it
somewhere
approachable.
Between you trying to answer questions for your 5-year-old niece.
Right.
And
you answering questions for me.
Right. And you know, what I would have to put on papers that I would write in seminary, right? It's not grad school level.
Right.
Anyways. So how does this work? And so again, to kind of keep using some of these descriptors, two natures, one person. He's not two persons. He is one person, two distinct natures without confusion. They're not mixed. The natures are not mixed or blended. He's not part of one and part of, and they just kind of mix without change. Neither is altered or transformed into the other. That's not 95%. Without division, they're not separated or independent, where he's kind of, again, kind of comes in and out of one. And without segregation, they're united in him. And how does that practically work? And so let's just kind of look, and we've talked about some of this last time, kind of some of these passages or stories that really illustrate it. And again, I think the story of Jesus calming the storm is probably my favorite. If somebody asks me to talk about this, I'll talk about that. How can God be so tired that he can sleep while water is dumping on him in a kind of a storm, of a generational storm?
Well, you'd assume also if he's at the bottom of the boat, he could just be floating in water.
But wake up, bro.
No, but it's not like he's just like sleeping on a dry place. You would assume water had gone down in it, and so he's just like sleeping in puddles of water.
He is absolutely. And again, we're not talking about some yacht that has some you can walk down in and kind of close your bedroom. Just
paddles were
just
something.
The boat.
Yeah.
Right. And he's just getting drenched.
Right. Which usually wakes people up when they get drenched.
Yeah. Just one little cup of water on you. You'd be like, ah!
Yeah, exactly.
But he was that tired.
Yeah.
But then he also gets up and just with words changes the weather, which is kind of a next level sort of, not that there levels to supernatural miracles, but obviously, I mean, the apostles had seen him, do healings and casting out demons. And I think in their brain, that's on one level.
Which also
speaking words to a storm is on another level.
In that same conversation, she goes, he probably does a miracle once a day, right?
Easy.
Probably.
Easy. If you think about what's going on with all 8 billion people around the planet, he's probably got one miracle in him at least. I'd say his average is probably above one.
Probably
above one.
On a good day.
On a good day. I don't know if he takes the Sabbath off still or not.
Right.
He did miracles on Sabbath when he was here, so I guess that's not even an issue. And so that is, and the passage we've already referred to, John John 1, the Word in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, in verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Again, just kind of pointing to both these things. He is fully God, but became flesh and dwelt among us.
Is there a short answer as to why it's called the Word? Or is that a whole podcast?
It was the Greek word logos. It was already a theological concept that would have been understood in Greek society at that time, in the kind of that Roman Greek culture. It was a concept of just kind of the active working of God. And so it was essentially kind of taking a theological concept that they had already and using it to describe Jesus.
Okay.
So they would have understood, oh, we're talking about the Logos. I know what this is. And they're like, in the beginning was the Logos. He's like, yep. And was with God. Yep. And the Word was, yep. Okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And you're like,
what?
I'm sorry. What'd you say?
It's the distract.
Who is it? Okay, wait. Oh, okay. So you're taking this general idea that we had and saying, like, you guys almost had it, but it is actually found in this uniquely in this person, Jesus Christ. So,
okay. Yeah, that's pretty summarized.
Galatians 4:4-5. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Again, God sent his Son, born of a woman. Again, both of these things together. And the council, and kind of which this really kind of got established, was the Council of Chalcedon, 451 AD, where they formally defined the hypostatic union. This is kind of the orthodox full understanding of this. And again, kind of trying to combat three different sorts of heresies. He was just a dude. Nope. He was just God. Nope. Well, it was kind of this mixed mingle kind of Nope. He was fully both. And so essentially for the almost 1600 years since then, there has been minimal to no controversy around this, even if there is also minimal
kind of like
understanding
the laws
of
of nature. It's like, how can you fill up a glass of water 100% and then fill it up again 100%, but it didn't lose any?
Right. Yeah. So what question, like to me, like maybe we'll have a Q&A episode later. Like what questions immediately pop into your mind when we describe this?
I guess how it's not a mixture and it just is. That it's just a state of being that is, rather than he had to work to like combine two natures, or that God had to conjure up two natures to bring into one. Yeah, it's like the questions I feel like that are easier to answer are kind of like the practical ones. Like, well, how did this work here? How did this work here? But it's like the concept of it. It's like, how can you be everywhere at once? God is someone who has a being who has a divine nature is everywhere at once. Who has a human nature is limited. Do you think he was fighting both natures? Like at times where it's like, I think that gets trying to balance both. That kind of gets to the without change, without confusion, and without separation. There's there's the way that it seems to be expressed to us at any given time, but it's like, if you are omnipresent and then you become a human on earth, are you still omnipresent? Does that lend itself toward the Trinity? What do you mean? That the Trinity was still in place even though there was a Son on earth in flesh? Well, that's another thing that we'll come into. We might as well just then jump into kenosis, because we're going to be just dancing all around it anyway. Is God never changes. Right. If God never changes, then the Trinity always has been, always will be, and there was never a time where there wasn't a Trinity. There's not like, oh, Jesus kind of stepped out here for a hot minute. Right. Oh, what happened to the Holy Spirit? Where'd he go? Oh, no, he's back. They didn't come in and out of that. And that Jesus
if God never changes, then Jesus always had two natures.
Right.
The Son always was fully God and fully human, which meant he was fully human
before he was incarnate.
Before there were even humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so what being created in the image of God then is we were given one of Jesus's natures, which makes us, even makes Jesus even more relatable to us.
But also further impacts that we are made in his image.
Yeah. And so let's just go and get into this. Kenosis is derived from, it's a Greek word. Kanoo is the verb, to empty. And in Philippians 2, which we referenced and talking about the deity of Christ, it says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God to be a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he kenosoed, right?
Okay.
He kenosis by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And so it describes a situation that Jesus is, for lack of a better word, he's here in heaven with God, by his very nature is God, and did not regard equality with God something to be held on to be grasped, to be used to his own advantage. Like I'm up here, and I've got all the perks and privileges and status and everything that comes from being capital G God. And he's like, I'm willing to relinquish something. And it says he emptied himself and taking on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of man, and being found in human form. So now he's here, first in his mama's belly, then he comes out and he's a baby, he grows into a person, becomes the man Jesus that we all have read so much about.
Right.
So if he was always fully God and fully human, but he's up here, and then it says he, quote, emptied himself and came down here.
What did he empty himself
What did he empty? What did he empty? What can you empty yourself up of and your nature not change? So God's nature cannot change. Do what?
The location.
Location? Okay, but again, even still that, does he go from I was omnipresent to now I'm not omnipresent? Is that a change in nature?
No, because he still has the ability to.
So he's okay. You're doing great. You're doing great here, right?
Okay.
Because this is kind of the way you think it. So now what you're saying is he is restricting the usage
of his full nature,
of some of his attributes. Okay. Same way with knowledge. There's things
reining it in.
Like what did Jesus know as a 2-day-old baby?
Everything.
Did he?
Yes.
Did that baby know everything?
I guess he had to grow in stature, but
like his brain was his brain capable of it?
The human brain was not capable of it.
But in his nature, he still was omniscient, but there was some limit. There's some sort of limit put on his for a season. Like I said, he grew in wisdom. There were things that he didn't know. But maybe we can say this about wisdom, growing in wisdom. Wisdom is the application of knowledge.
Right.
There's some things that Jesus had never experienced.
Right. And so
he grew in experience. Right.
This is getting mind-bendy.
It is getting mind-bendy. Okay. So.
Well, it's also making me think, this is a wild turn, but it's making me think of WandaVision.
WandaVision.
Because she wanted so badly to experience natural progression of things with Vision, but they had to break out of their other form to be able to experience things like that. But she had to create a whole universe to make that possible.
Wow. All right, so here's where I feel like you were headed, and this is a pretty popular view of this. Kind of one of its main interpretations of kenosis is self-limitation. Kenosis involves Jesus's voluntary self-limitation of the independent exercise of his divine attributes during his earthly ministry.
That's kenosis?
Yeah. So that's what he emptied himself out of. Mm-hmm. I am voluntarily choosing to limit how I can just decide if I want to use this power or not.
But I don't think that's him removing those abilities.
Yeah. So the thing that he is emptying himself up is he did not regard equality with God to be something to use to his own advantage. Mm-hmm. I am now no longer going to act like someone who has the freedom to do this anytime that I want, but I'm going to limit my exercise, not his ability. Mm-hmm. He had the ability to be everywhere and to know everything, but he limited, again, his exercise of it. Mm-hmm. I am choosing to not be omnipresent. I'm choosing to not allow myself to be self-sustaining, for my body to allow itself to decay, to die, to bleed.
Do you think there's times where the first time he was thirsty, he was like, that's cute? They sometimes are in lack.
Again, there's so many things to it. I'm like, and again, there's like a, we go in all sorts of little hypothetical questions. Did baby Jesus cry?
Oh, well, if he's taking on the form of human, he had to communicate in some way. So,
right, it's not all crying is sinful,
right?
I mean, sometimes crying can be an angry tantrum,
right?
But sometimes it's
a cue
the only sound
hungry.
that a physical body can make of that development to be able to. Mm-hmm. But away in a manger. You know that, familiar with that one? The little Lord Jesus.
Asleep in the hay.
No crying he makes. Mm-hmm. A theological statement being made there.
Right.
Associating crying with sin, and that Jesus would not have done that even as a baby.
Right.
Right.
I feel like he did, based on the fact that he pushed his mom's buttons. No way that started at that age.
I shouldn't even have mentioned that. But that is a very hypostatic union kind of moment. Mm-hmm. I am fully God. I have an agenda. There's a reason why I'm here. Mm-hmm. I am not limited by I'm some kid who's responsible to my parents.
But he's still
a kid that is responsible to his parents. I mean, it was just like. And they come and they're like, "What are you on about?" And I'm like, "I'm on about what I'm here for. Right. Like, what are we even talking about?"
Is, just kind of like that describes perfectly what is relatable and respectable about him. Mm-hmm. That he isn't someone that we can't relate to, but he did just make himself subject to his parents when he actually was far beyond his parents.
Right, and so then you start asking questions like this, and this is probably things that we really just can't answer. Did he have to remember that he was the Son of God?
Right.
Did he learn that he was the Son of God?
Point. Yeah.
Like, how do he's got the divine nature in him. He's restricted in some ways, it would seem, as a baby. Mm-hmm. So there's like, is there a nature that knew and a nature that didn't? How does that work? Because then that kind of goes into that kind of mix and mingling sort of thing. But again, it also speaks to what was the depth of the kenosis. Mm-hmm. Was it to the point to where his independent exercise of his divine attributes meant, at least for a little while, he didn't know anything. Right. He went from omniscient to I don't know nothing. And he continued to restrain his omniscience, but was growing in wisdom and favor with God, and then became more and more aware. Or was 3-year-old Jesus kind of sitting around in his mind thinking,
I know what's going on.
I'm sitting here playing catch, and I got to wait another 27 years to save the universe.
Because I call us nerdy, but we are Marvel fans. But there is always a point in the movie where the person has to come to understand what they really are.
Right.
But we don't have that piece of his story. Yeah. It's just kind of always assumed that he naturally became that. it didn't have to have like an initiation into who he actually was.
Yeah, and so there doesn't seem to be any point from at 12 he seemed to be very clear on who he was.
Mm-hmm.
I'm about my Father's business.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, he was not talking about Joseph.
Right.
He was talking about God the Father. And so by 12, he had a full awareness of his mission.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so did he always have that full awareness, but he was limited in his physical body and to be able to communicate it? Was he like, what were the nature of those limitations? Because it's important to kind of continue on here that he did not lose his divinity. He did not give up his divine nature. He remained fully God.
Mm-hmm.
Fully God, toddler.
Mm-hmm.
He just was choosing to limit the exercise of it and allowed himself to exist inside a toddler
body,
and again, and brain question mark.
Right. But I mean, even if you think about him at the temple, it's not like people would all of a sudden be viewing him as a grown man that had authority. They were looking at a child that were probably thinking, who's this kid speaking at the temple?
And so then it's like, if he was always fully human, always had a fully human nature, but then he becomes a person. And so he had a fully human nature, but was never like a human, had a human body before.
Right.
Which is interesting to think because, again, we'll be in heaven someday. We will still be fully human.
Mm-hmm. But we may not have human bodies.
But we may not have, we will not have this kind of physical, we'll have some sort of, and Paul's like some kind of something. And so you can be be a fully human person and
not be encased.
Yeah. Which is kind of what he was. So we have that. So he takes on the limitations of human nature, vulnerability, dependence, suffering. And really, and this is kind of the point of that passage in Philippians 2, it really is just a statement of humility and obedience on his part.
That passage goes from every extreme.
What do you mean?
Like if you read it again, it's like he is God, but he emptied himself. He had access to claim equality, but he didn't claim it. Mm-hmm. Like it just goes to each opposite end of everything that
it's says. Like he starts his equality with God. He humbled himself to become a person, not just a person, but a servant, not just a servant, but a servant who dies, not just one who dies, but one who would die on a cross. Mm-hmm. And with that, God gave him the name that is above every name.
Right.
And so it's like
all the way back around, right?
Right. And the interesting thing about it is this insanely deep theological passage about the hypostatic union and the incarnation, all these things, is it's really just an example that Paul is using to say, hey, in your relationships, you should consider other people important, just like Jesus did. Like he could have just ended it there.
But then he went to them.
You should don't be selfish. Think about other people, just like Jesus did. And then he could have just gone on to the next topic, but instead inserts this like
massive statement.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
To try to help us theoretically understand, but really I think all it does is kind of spark the mind a little bit.
Yeah.
And so my plan here was just kind of drop all of that.
Okay.
And let it kind of simmer for them, for you.
Yeah.
Let it just kind of settle. And then let this be kind of where a lot of the Q&A can come.
Okay. See, at this point, this reminds me a little bit of the Genesis 1-3 of how much is in that little passage. This is not what the whole episode is about, but the notion that people think we're smarter now because we're more advanced. I'm like, Home Dog just broke down the craziest theological concept.
Yep.
At the most limited technological age up to that point, they're the most advanced, but they're so much more limited than what we are now. But it's like, no, he's smarter than me.
Yeah, and so and the way that Paul ties it into then also to salvation. I mean, this was the process by which Jesus makes himself available to be the sacrifice.
Yeah,
he had to be this big in order to be able to make the sacrifice. He had to be one of us to kind of be on our team to make the sacrifice for us. And there's this huge process he had to go through to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And now we are just kind of left stunned, kind of confused. Like, how does even that work? And we are not by nature in our church kind of a deeply philosophical, theological church. This podcast is from time to time. We spend most of our time like, hey, really more, we're going to go to Philippians 2. Let's say maybe Abigail, be less selfish.
Mm-hmm.
I should be less selfish. Let's be less selfish. But I think it is really important for us to take some time to really reflect and understand, because even our deepening of understanding of the gospel and the nature of who Jesus is just should ultimately lead us to even more significant practical applications.
Mm-hmm.
The more I appreciate what Jesus did and who he is, the bigger the gospel becomes and the greater compulsion that I have to
worship and
live. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think it's also cool with rounding that out that this isn't something that there was extra text left behind that these councils read to understand who he was, but we never have access to these. This was stuff that they studied the Bible that we today have access to and discovered the true nature of who Jesus is.
Yeah, and we're just sitting here on, again, 2,000 years of reflection on it.
But it's not like you have to go to seminary. This is something that you, viewer or anything like that, they're studying the Word of God and coming to understand who God and Jesus, all these systematic things. But it's not like a lot of this stuff can feel super heady that these councils discovered, but it's not like they had extra text to go off of. They were looking at the Bible that we read.
Yeah, and so then for us, it's kind of like, some of us are going to be attracted to a certain level of depth on these kinds of philosophical questions, and there's no right level of depth to have to it. But it's like, I think it's important for us to at least kind of embrace the mystery of it and the power of it, and us not kind of devolve into just kind of simply people, Jesus was a good dude and he died for us and that's cool. No, I mean, this is the God of the universe emptying himself in order to take on the form of a servant and to be the one and only possible perfect mediator for us between God and men. Because that, I mean, really, we'll just call that, if Jesus died for our sins and really understanding who Jesus is, that's the soil in which our entire house is built. This is
the most secure soil you could ever imagine.
Right. And I am firming up the soil so that my house can be even stronger by fully appreciating the depths of who Jesus is and what he went through.
Yeah.
Because we don't want functionally to turn Jesus into a really good teacher. I don't think any of us on a theology test would say Jesus was only a good teacher.
Right.
But when we don't take the time to deeply explore the nature and the mystery around it, functionally, he just becomes somebody who drops some good life advice every now and then and did this really cool thing for us once.
Yeah.
That allowed us to be baptized and then
be
saved and go to heaven.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is, and this is just we don't even understand the limited amount of explained to us.
Right.
And then
it's still complex.
That's the tip of the iceberg based on all the things it doesn't have in words to describe to us too.
Right.
And so I think like we talked about with the Trinity, we talk about here, I think there's some things in soteriology, there's some things on the Holy Spirit we'll talk about that are just kind of really good mind expanding exercises that I think can ultimately, if we let them play out the right way, will lead us to a deeper commitment and worship.
Right. So, which I think the walk away for me from this is awestruck, and that is the coolest thing that we could have ever received. It makes me sad for other religions or other belief systems that don't have a relatable savior like we do.
They just have some dude that taught things.
Right. But we have someone that became like us, experienced what we did, and did the impossible, bridging the chasm. It just leads to more like gratitude, worship, and almost obsession of like, he did the coolest in the coolest way, and there's no holes to poke in it. He did it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I hope that you enjoyed this little mind exercise. And again, we did barely scratch the surface of it. And I'm guessing over the next few weeks, we'll come up with some good questions, kind of talk about it some more. If you have any, go to thegrovechurch.org/connect. There's a little form you can fill out, drop some questions. We'll put it in there. If you want to learn more about our church, that's the way to go. If there's any way we can help you, that's a great place to go. But as always, Abigail, thank you for being with us.
Of course.
And thank you. We'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Cultivate podcast. Our hope is that you are taking steps to go deeper in your faith, that you are asking big questions and you're looking for answers. We hope that we can be a resource for you through our podcast and any other way that we can help you. You can find all our episodes anywhere that you can find podcasts, including YouTube. And again, thank you so much for joining us.